Hey everybody, it's Caroline here at the Kindergarten Disco, and I thought I would film a part one of a little series of how to work with difficult kiddos. So kiddos in your classroom or whatever environment you're working in with children that present challenging behaviors in some way. So I thought it would be great to just kind of break it into pieces because I think this is a whole massive kind of conversation, but I thought it would be nice just to kind of start with the very first piece of, when there's a child who's presenting some challenging behaviors of some kind. So whatever that might be, I'm going to use an example of a child who will not come to like a group circle time. So that's something that's pretty common in most of our early childhood classrooms. We have some sort of group or whole group session of some kind, whether it's a morning meeting or maybe it's your literacy block, or maybe it's just that morning time where you're singing some songs and perhaps just getting going on your day, taking attendance, whatever that might be. So for this example, I'll use that behavior as the challenging behavior. So for part one, all I wanted to say for this piece, because I think this is an overwhelming issue, and I know as a new teacher last year, I felt like I would be awake at night thinking of all these different, like, what if I have a kid that does this and this and this? And so I think it can feel really overwhelming, especially if you haven't yet stepped into the classroom or you've only been in the classroom just a little bit, and you may be venturing into your first year of teaching or something like that. Dealing with a challenging behavior can be so hard and kind of frankly a little bit scary as a teacher. So I just kind of want to say that piece, that it's okay to feel overwhelmed and nervous about this part of teaching. I don't think there's any teacher that doesn't feel overwhelmed and nervous about this. But for the very first piece of dealing with a challenging child, I would say is to be an observer. So make observations about when these challenging behaviors happen. So it's almost like a detective, right? It's like the who, when, where, how, why pieces of it. But if you've maybe been teaching for a few days or a few weeks and you have this kind of reoccurring challenge with this child who just does not want to come to circle time, or maybe, there might be some other issue that's happening, but we'll just use the circle time example. Think about being an observer. So noticing rather than a reactor, because as teachers, sometimes we can often just be like, okay, I have to figure out how to fix this, and this kid has to sit down, and, we need to take a time out if they can't sit down or whatever it might be. First, just be an observer, maybe make some notes, document these things. When is this happening? Is it every morning? Is it only in the morning time? Will the child come to circle time in the afternoon? Does it have to do with sitting still? Is it about where they're sitting, how they're sitting? There's so many factors to think about. There's so many kids who have a hard time actually sitting up. That's something that we don't think about as adults. But there's many kids who don't have the core strength to sit up. So what looks like a misbehavior can actually be a physical difficulty that this child is struggling with. Or perhaps it's, a new environment. They've never been to school, or they've never had to come to a group meeting of some kind. So just kind of being an observer and making some notes about what you're noticing with this. So before you go into reaction and sort of fix it mode, think about just being an observer and making notes about, when is this happening? What are the different pieces to this situation happening? In my class, I often struggled with our mid-morning literacy block. And I was like, gosh, I feel like we just start to fall apart. The rails come off. I can't get kids to be at their centers. I've got kids walking around. I've got kids rolling on the floor. I've got kids fooling around. And one of the things that clicked to me is that it's not them. It's what's the environment that I was putting them in, and realizing that, these kids are 5 and they're hungry and they're tired of, sitting still and kind of focusing at center. So one of my strategies was actually allowing them to have snack during their center time so that we could still be kind of, productive and be working on some things that we needed to work on, but also allowing for the fact that they're human and they needed to get a drink and stretch their legs for a minute and perhaps get their snacks out of their bag. And then they would return and sit at their centers. And it was kind of like watching, a bunch of adults in an office. They were chatting and eating and working on their centers. And that was one of the solutions that I came up with. So the first step to solving those challenging behavior issues in your class is just be an observer and look and listen and take notes on when are these things happening? What are some of the pieces in these situations? And oftentimes, it's not that the child is trying to do these things on purpose or, is just being difficult, even though that may be how it presents itself. But there's always more at play, right? It's like an iceberg where you see the top, but there's a whole lot going on under the water. So step one, be an observer. And I'll get into some following steps in some of the other videos, but that's a good place to start. All right, thanks, friends.